From the bulletin, you'll notice the scriptural requirement for the day, John 9, 1 through 41. If you looked at that like I did and you thought, serious? 41 verses? It's 2 pages in the Bible. And so I read it several times and decided rather than reading it this morning and taking the rest of this half hour, that we might simply just paraphrase that for you a little bit because it's a story that all of you know. Those of you who were here last week know that Stuart had ably pointed out to us that much of the early books in the Bible and the New Testament are stories, and that's in fact what this is. This is the story of the day when Jesus is at the temple and he heals a blind man who had been blind from birth. And as you follow the story in the text, it talks about how Jesus comes upon the blind man and decides that this person is worthy of a healing and really does weird thing. He spits on the ground and makes a kind of a putty out of the earth that's there and then applies that to the eyes of the gentleman and then suggests that he go to a specific body of water to wash it off, which he does. He goes, and miraculously he can see. And he's obviously thankful. And he comes back, and he looks for Jesus, doesn't find him. But at the temple, other people had asked him what happened, and he said, I cannot really tell you exactly what happened, but I've been blind from birth, and thanks to the efforts of this gentleman, I can see now. And eventually the word gets to the clerics at the temple and they confront him and they say, talk to me. You know, they're thinking probably it's a hoax that hadn't been revealed at all. That in fact, this was probably another person that just kind of looked like the blind man. But he stands up and he says, no, absolutely. I've been healed by a prophet. And all of a sudden in the scripture, you get this sense that his awareness of what had happened to him had modified from just a simple healing to a situation where he realized that the agent of that healing was someone special. Interesting. The clerics still didn't believe him. They confronted mom and dad. Mom and dad basically said, yeah, that's our son. He was blind from birth. And they asked them what happened and they declined to answer. And they said, talk to him. He's a grown-up. He can tell you what happened. So he did. And they, again, find it impossible to either accept the premise that he had been healed, and on that day, because it was the Sabbath. And something like that would have been against the Judaic law. And hence, the clerics, the Sadducees, and the Pharisees just kind of passed it all off. But at that point, another really interesting thing had happened, and that was that the gentleman who had been healed now concluded himself and identified himself as a disciple. That's the scripture. I would acknowledge, just to start off here, that I'm indebted to some who are actually in the congregation this morning as I prepared for this. I think back a couple of weeks ago to Sterling's conversation about the fact that all of us carry a portion of the Spirit with us every minute, and that we need not invoke that for a service because it's resident among us. And you may have noticed that I didn't offer an invocation. I offered an opening prayer. And thank you, Sterling. You know, I listened, observed, and I liked what I heard. Secondly, Jim Jones, maybe 3 or 4 weeks ago, kind of led off Lent, and he really introduced a couple of concepts that were sort of new to me. It had never really occurred to me just how somber Lent was as a run-up to Easter. I don't think somber, particularly as a part of Lent. And he acknowledged that there are some denominations that are very strict about that, and that would not have even accepted some of the hymns that we were singing. So the hymn that we just sung was sort of an ode to Jim. it's a sort of a dark hymn, all things considered. And the premise that we must walk that lonesome valley by ourselves, I honestly think it's not exactly true. I think that we are surrounded by resources that assist us in a much more useful way than the Christ would have had. And I'm thankful for that. I read the Herald from cover to cover. It's not the only magazine I read cover to cover. I read Time too, and I read Consumer Report. But at any rate, in the last Herald, there was a pretty lengthy article by Charmaine and Tony Chavala-Smith about versions of the Bible. And to be 100% honest, I've only ever owned a King James version and an inspired version in my entire adult existence. But having read the article, I thought, no, I really need to buy another Bible. There it is. I bought the New Revised Standard Version Updated Edition. And I bought it because of what I read in that article, that there were many writings that have been uncovered over the last 30, 40 years that are useful in providing context and verbiage into the words. So I thought, I shouldn't be disadvantaged. I should take advantage of that. And as it happens, that's the scripture that I paraphrased for you this morning. I have a kind of a pattern when I'm asked to be in charge or speak. Stuart didn't really give me a choice. He said, would you like to take charge of the service on the 15th, and then you can do whatever you want to do. If you want to be in charge, if you want to speak, go for it. And he encouraged me to try to involve our team in some fashion. But I have a kind of a pattern when I get an assignment. It's just like almost instantly, the glasses change colors. And everything that I see in current tense and many things that have happened to me in my life before start to be reinterpreted in the context of the theme, in the context of the focus. And I'll have to fault Amy Sherman for that a week ago, kind of having introduced that concept and observing her own pattern or process getting ready for her role last Sunday. So I kind of felt enfranchised that I'm not the only one in the world who operates that way. So back to the text. There seem to be several appropriate directions that you could take that would be okay for ministry today. For instance, the gradual transition of the blind man from being healed to observing it was healing by a prophet to the point of being a disciple. There's a sermon there, for sure. Happens not to be the one I want to do today. Or you could make a sermon out of the discomfort that was being felt by the parents, who the only role they were willing to play was to acknowledge that this, in fact, was their son who had been blind for birth and would decline to offer any of the details of the healing. Scriptures tell us that that's probably because they felt if they were to associate themselves too clearly with Jesus, they might be banned from the temple. What a bummer. I could make a conversation out of the clear blindness of the Jewish clerics and their unwillingness to see what was before their very eyes, at least in part probably because the miracle was performed by an unsanctioned person and on the Sabbath against the Jewish law. There's a sermon there, pretty sure. Or, you've already guessed, I went with the or. Or we could examine and celebrate the blessings which come from seeing. The theme this morning, if you read it when you open it up, was faithfully see. And my mind was drawn to the blessings that can come when we in fact see, and we do everything we can to sensitize ourselves to the opportunities that come from seeing. So I looked at number 4, and as soon as I did, my memory bank and my present tense was flooded literally with memories of moments when I thought I saw. The result is that the morning time that we're going to spend here together is going to largely be in the vein of stories. And they admittedly are my stories, and I make no claim that they are special or that they're somehow true. They're just a part of my life experience. And they have served as important benchmarks in the evolution of Stew McDole thought and deed. Again, nothing special. What I'm trying to do is to take accountability, not trying to foist it on any of the rest of you. And at the end of the day, I am less concerned about the thought and the deed or the product than I am in the process of seeing. That's where my brain is this morning. Okay, so for starters, I would take the 4 people that I just mentioned. Sterling cleared my sight on a couple of things when he chatted the other day. Jim cleared my sight on a couple of things when he brought it up in his sermon the other day. Amy cleared my sight and enfranchised me a little bit with her attitude about context, etc. And I bought a Bible because of Tony and Charmaine. And I was excited to buy it. I was excited when it came. And I was pleased to find it was on Amazon. It was going to show up in 3 days. I was glad to see it. Okay, so back to benchmarks experiences. You all know that we came from Macomb, Illinois, where I taught at Western Illinois University. We worshiped in a small mission where mostly I was pastor. And my wife would say, there's a certain price you pay when you're the pastor because you always got to be there Sunday. No matter where we were, we would be back there Sunday. But 2 things really stuck out in the context of this service to me that happened to do with our church school there. We studied 2 books that were honestly critical in my attitude toward ongoing adult life. One of those was Faces of God. Some of you probably read it, but Faces of God. And the premise of the book was that we get a glimpse of God in the face and actions of every single person alive around us, and further, every creation around us. And that we have a window on God ultimate through the faces of all those animate creations around us. It's made me very, very much more open to that premise and that possibility. The second book is a book called I'm Okay, You're Okay. It apparently has existed. It's in its 4th edition right now. I just checked. And it's an interesting premise. It's mostly about transaction and analysis, and the author is a psychologist, a psychiatrist type. And his premise is this, that when we interact with each other, in other words, transactions, that we tend to choose one of 3 voices. The first voice that we get good at is the child voice. It's an unknowing voice. It's a voice that understands that he or she does not know everything and that we're susceptible to authoritarian interaction, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. We get it. I'm not okay. And I get reinforcement for that all the time when I'm directed. They say the first word that we learn, no. Child voice. The second one, and we seem to be really good at, is the parent voice. The parent is a teller. The parent tends to be a little authoritarian. The parent tends to know and make that very clear. And that kind of works between parent and child. The third voice, and the voice, of course, which he advocates, is what he calls the adult voice. And this is a non-judgmental voice. This is a listener. It's not personal voice, who hears, interacts, and tries to intercede in ways that would be helpful And what he maintains is that whatever voice we use tends to provoke a voice in the listener. So if I say to my wife, "Don't do that," that's definitely the adult voice, and she would tend to respond in a child voice, "Stick in your ear." All right? That would be an illustration. Versus if I were to say, "Gosh, man, I'm not sure about that advice. I don't know what would happen if we really do that." And then presumably we get to have a conversation about whether or not we should put gas in the oil tank or whatever else, even though I might already think that I know. But for those of you who know me, for good or for ill, that was a benchmark moment. I try really hard to operate with the adult voice. Okay, stories. So for 4 years, I was Center Stake Youth Director, back in the days of stakes and big stakes. And I had already been through college, and I'd been exposed to a high adventure camp led by Bud Sheehy when I was a senior in high school. We went to the Rockies. And I was really convinced that high adventure camping was a very viable vehicle for youth ministry. And I had a friend who was familiar with the boundary waters, northern Minnesota and southern Canada, and I implored him to take some of us and kids on a trip, and he did, and I loved it. And I really did think that the premise that high adventure camping was a very viable avenue of youth ministry was underscored. So I started to lead those trips. We're on our second trip up there. There were, I think, maybe 4 staff and 17 happened to be all young men. That was before we were enlightened, sorry. And as I planned the trip, you get these maps that tell you where you can go and what lakes and whatever. And as I planned the trip, I decided that I wanted to take the group into a lake called Ensign Lake because I thought they would truly be in the wilderness. Now, the boundary waters is an area of our two countries where they don't even allow flyovers. There's no plane traffic over it. It's meant to be a true wilderness. And I looked at Ensign Lake, and it was surrounded by major walks to get in. And I thought, if we get it into the lake, we'll truly have a wilderness experience. So I chose a route which I thought would be pretty demanding. And it was demanding. We were in Long Lake, which was so named because it was a lengthy lake. And we took a portage from Long Lake to a lake that was called Toe Lake. I should have been more careful about what Toe Lake might look like. So when you get to the end of the lake, you have to pick up your bed and walk, so to speak. You pick up packs, you pick up the canoes, you pick up the paddles, you pick up your fishing gear and whatever else. Okay, so I was a little younger then. For me, a typical portage meant a pack on the front, a pack on the back, canoe overhead, and maybe something riding inside the canoe. And because I was the leader of the trip, I was always the last one, which meant I was always picking up somebody's paddle or somebody's fly rod or somebody's whatever else that they had left. So the very first portage from Long Lake that was going to take us to Toe Lake was 146 rods. Why rods? I don't know. A rod's 16 and a half feet. So that meant it was pressing a half mile. Okay, but you're going to walk a half mile with 2 packs, canoe overhead, flies buzzing inside, whatever else. And of course, as we started the portage, it started to rain. And so now the rocks in the path get muddy and slippery and whatever else. And it was demanding. I mean, I'd been on a lot of portages, and I'd always prided myself that I could walk with those 2 packs in that canoe overhead straight through the portage. But every now and then, you would come to a spot on the portage where there would be a limb over the path, and you could kind of tip your canoe against that and grab a quick breath. I stopped 4 times. I thought, whoa, this is a serious portage, and I'm the last one. So I keep listening, because when you get to the end of the portage, you hear all the kids rolling out of their canoes, and you can hear the metal against the rock, and whatever. I could not hear it. It wasn't here, and it wasn't happening, and it wasn't happening. And I thought, where is this lake? Finally, I heard metal on rock, and I thought, I'm getting there. And I got there. This lake was smaller than this room. And you could see the entrance to the next portage, which was 138 rods. You could see it. There wasn't even any real reason to put your canoe in the lake. You just as well walk around and get to it. And another almost half a mile to be able to get into Ensign Lake. So all of these kids had just rolled out of their canoes, slid down to the ground, and they were flat out just exhausted there. So who was I? I rolled out of my canoe, I leaned up against a tree, I slid down against the ground. And then a miracle happened. I could not believe my eyes. Here we are, 20 of us on the beaches of Toe Lake, and 3 little fawn walk out of the wilderness. I'm sure they lived there, and they knew that anybody who made it to Toe Lake was no threat. And they bounced around just like fawns are supposed to do. The spots were there, the tails were white, they were perky, they were getting drinks and playing in the water and paid zero attention to us. But all of those kids and adults were fixed on those 3 little fawn. And nobody chased a fawn, nobody captured a fawn, nobody bothered a fawn. All of us were just blessed, and I would say observant, and I would say seeing one of the glories of creation. It's made a difference in my life. That happened, oh my gosh, 50 years ago. It happened a long time ago, and it's still in my story bank. Boundary Waters and the fawns, they're in there. I was running a camp at Camp Donovan. Big camp, 180 plus kids, all from one stake. And I had run into a gentleman at an ecumenical youth ministers meeting from Kenya. His name was George Olawai. And I just thought, gosh, maybe our kids would really find it intriguing. He was a Baptist minister, to have a chance to interact with someone from a different faith in a different country. So I invited him to come to camp, and he came. About 2 days into camp, he had to go into town for something, so he drove into town. He had brought his son. His son was maybe 6. And he came back into camp about an hour and a half later, and his car was a little dinged, and his son had a scruff of hair about the size of a fist that had just been ripped out, and kind of bloody. And he's back in camp, and I said, George, talk to me. What's going on here? He said, well, we had a little accident in town. I said, well, what did the police say? Well, we didn't wait for the police. I said, serious? I said, did you take your son to the hospital? No, I thought he would be okay. And what he said was, I just kneeled down and I thank God for protecting my son and myself. It's just a car. My mission was here. And I'm so grateful for the willingness of the Lord to watch over my life at every phase. And I thought to myself, I would never leave the scene of an accident. I would never leave the scene of an accident. I would never have not taken my kid to the hospital. But I am so appreciative of the quality of faith that this gentleman have to read into that circumstance the glory of his Creator, and to see the willingness of that Creator to interject the Spirit into every phase of life. Changed my attitude about how big or how small becomes an indication of who and where we are. This gentleman's readiness, willingness to accept the ministrations of the Spirit in all areas. And I found myself saying, we're all blind in some ways. We don't all see every opportunity to be seen. But if we can scrub the window off a little bit and see more, we will find ourselves positively affected. Same camp had a really delightful service one evening. And between the service and campfire that night, I'd gone back over to my cabin, and I ran into Rudy Leisinger. I said, Rudy, what are you doing? He said, well, I've been doing pull-ups. I said, what? He said, yeah, I've been over on that tree, and I've just been doing pull-ups. And I said, why? He said, I felt so good after that service. I felt so close to my brother and sister campers. I felt so close to my Maker. I had to do something to express that. And his something was doing pull-ups. It changed my attitude about what people might do as they see the implications of their Creator in their day-to-day life and how they might respond to that. I think he was seeing and responding to that sight that he had seen. Once Patty and I moved to the Nauvoo area, it seemed like we were on call to be at that point, district youth leader, so we were, and senior high camp director, so we were. And so I kind of changed their attitude about senior high camp. This was small. This wasn't 185 kids. This was more like maybe just under 40. And the staff were from all over, and this was pre-Zoom. But I had 3 or 4 staff meetings with them at a time because I'm kind of a philosophic guy when it comes to camp. And we ultimately landed on a premise that we wanted to imply the continuum of witness and also to enfranchise the campers' ability to stand on their own 2 feet. And part of that premise was there was going to be no staff member in camp that didn't have a role in the educational and or sacred ministries of the camp. So the cooks were not going to get by not teaching a class or running a prayer meeting or whatever else. Everybody who was on camp was going to play a role. And it turned out one of the cooks was a superstar. She was great. And the ability of, we thought, the kids to be able to see that every single member of that staff had a role to play in the big picture of the kingdom seemed to be reinforced. And we had also said, we're going to rely on the students, we're going to rely on the campers to take a lot of responsibility for programming. You are, in a sense, the chair of worship, So, Chuck Tripp, who ultimately became the director after I left, was responsible for the worship committee. And we had a camp staff meeting one morning, and he started to describe what they wanted to do this final morning. They wanted to put down pine branches on all of the sidewalks toward the tabernacle where we were going to have the church. And then they wanted to meet everyone on the porch and wash their feet. And then they wanted to, prepare this sacrament right in front of everyone. And I looked at Chuck and I said, whoa, Chuck, this seems a little bit off the wall to me, and I wonder if we should encourage this or not. And he looked at me and he said, Stew, didn't we say we were going to let them stand on their own 2 feet? Didn't we say we were going to let them sink or swim on their own? Didn't we say that? And I said, yes, we did say that. And so we did it. And it was wonderful. And I thought to myself, Chuck did me such a favor because he reminded me to do what we believe. I have 3 families. I have a biological family, I have a church family. You've heard about several of them, but I also have a volleyball family. They don't recognize me in a coat and tie. So we'll get into more recognizable garb, okay? All right. So when I arrived at Graceland, it was because I was hired by Betty Welch. Some of you remember Betty. And she called me up. I was at Western Illinois. I was chair of a graduate program in Recreation Leadership Services, and she said, Stu, why don't you come over here, take over our degree program in recreation, and coach our women's volleyball team. And there's a story there, but I don't have time to tell that one, but I said, okay, we'll come. Betty retired. Actually took her job as division head. But we stayed in touch, and I talked to her maybe 10 years ago, and she was asking me about sport, et cetera. Betty started probably every female sport on our campus. She was the original coach for probably every female sport on our campus. And she said to me, Stu, I don't know if I could coach today because the athletes all seem so entitled and so stuck on themselves and so, out of it with what might be the realities of of Graceland principles, et cetera. And what I said to her is, Betty, you might be surprised. And it hasn't been my experience. So I brought a few of those players with us. So we're going to talk first with Faith. Faith, why don't you grab that mic and come up here. Where are you from?
I'm from Council Bluffs, Iowa.
Council Bluffs. Good student?
I think so.
Academic All-American?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Okay. So she's a good student. All right. So the first thing that stuck in my mind about Faith is she's the only recruit to our program ever that I know of who was interviewed on the radio after signing. True story, right?
Yes.
How did that happen?
A news radio station reached out to me and wanted to hear about my decision to Graceland University. So I decided to go ahead with it and talk to them about it. Okay.
And she sent me a copy of the vocal of it, and it was delightful to hear and to listen. Somehow, am I too close, Rick? And it was delightful to listen to. Were you proud?
I was proud.
Mom and Dad proud?
Yeah.
Yeah, they were proud in a good way. Did you think you made a good decision?
I do, yeah.
No, I listened to the radio, and I thought to myself, I like what I'm hearing. I'm seeing some light that this is a person who's a nice match to our college and to our program, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So you and I had a conversation not long ago. What was the substance of that conversation?
I've decided to graduate early and pursue an opportunity in free graduate school and work in residence life and help the community at the colleges.
Okay, so were you afraid to talk to me?
Was I afraid to talk to you?
Yeah.
No.
Okay, so hopefully that's a good thing. But it was a circumstance, it was kind of a tough conversation because I'm her coach, she's a varsity starter, and she wants to graduate early and leave. What did I say?
You said that this is too good of an opportunity to turn up and that you were proud of me.
Okay, and that's the reality of it. And having said that, I felt like I was seeing. For good or for ill. Once again, I'm not trying to sell this, I'm just trying to say, all right, this is the life experience of Stew McDole, and I felt like, no, this was a good choice for her to make. I don't know if she knows this, but she was on a visit last week to Old Dominion, and one of her other mentors on campus, the director of one of our leadership majors, sent an email out to staff and faculty, and here's what it said. Hi, please say a prayer for Faith Case and the Old Dominion University community. Faith, one of our honors psychology and volleyball students, is at ODU interviewing for graduate assistantship. Thank you, Nancy King. And I thought, what could be more Graceland? What could be more seeing than inviting the support of the broader staff of Graceland for a young woman who is confronting opportunities that might be life-changing for her and represent a free master's degree, which is not a bad idea. Did you know that?
I didn't know that.
You should thank her.
I will.
All right. You should thank her. It was a good thing. So it might be Old Dominion, it might be Wisconsin Riverside, it might be whatever else. But in any case, it will be a new chapter in your life. And what will be your parting thoughts on the chapter you're departing from?
Obviously, I'll be a little sad. I'm leaving my friends behind, my teammates, my coaches, the school that shaped me into the person that I am today. But I know that I'll always have like the Graceland people and the community to have my back. And if I ever need anything, I can always contact anybody.
All right. Thanks.
Thank you, guys.
All right. Morgan and Mac. Yep. Both, yeah. So I interpret much of that conversation as little miracles and opportunities to see. All right, so you got the mic, Mackenzie. Introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Mackenzie Moore. I'm from San Antonio, Texas, and I'm a freshman.
All right, what's your major?
I'm an elementary education major.
All right, are you a good student?
Yes, I am.
All right, you going to be a future All-American?
Yes.
Academic All-American?
Oh, yes.
No, all right, let your friend have it.
Hi, I'm Morgan Volstad. I'm from Calgary, Canada, and I'm a freshman, and I'm majoring in allied health.
All right, you a good student?
I think so.
All right, you going to be an academic All-American?
That's the goal.
Yeah, she is. Both of them will be next year for sure. Okay, so interesting story. We had a prospective student athlete who wanted to visit campus on the 7th of January. Semester didn't start till the 8th. I hated to have someone come without some players on campus, both for the interactive part and for the opportunity to basically have people to play with. And so I just started looking around. So I called Morgan. You remember this? I called her. She was still in Calgary. All right, and I said, Morgan, are you on campus? She said, no. I said, when are you coming? She said, not till tomorrow. And then did you tell me how you were going to get there, back to campus? You flew to Kansas City. You were met by Aaliyah.
Oh, yeah, and we were
All
going
right,
to
so
drive
tell
up.
them that story. Yeah.
So we had school, I think, on the Monday, and then it ended up getting canceled because of the weather. Is that what happened?
Okay.
The weather was terrible.
But the important thing for me was,
we
here's
got
a freshman from Calgary. She's being picked up by a freshman from Blue Springs. And they're from worlds apart. All right,
Yeah.
happened to play on the same team.
Yeah.
But I just thought, wow, I'm seeing that. That's a good thing. I'm liking that. So I called Mackenzie. So did I reach you, Mackenzie? Yeah, I did.
Yes, you
I
did.
reached
Yes,
her.
you
I
did.
said, Mackenzie, are you on campus? And she said, no. And I said, when you come back? Now till tomorrow. And then she said, do you want to talk to Stephanie? You remember that?
Yes, I do.
Who's Stephanie?
Stephanie is one of me and Morgan's best friends at Graceland. She's from Houston, Texas, and she and Naya both came to my house the last weekend before we all left because her sister was playing in a volleyball tournament in San Antonio, so both of them just stayed up with me. Stu
Okay.
calls me. Oh,
So she said her third name there. You may not have picked up on it because as soon as I talked to Stephanie, she said, do you want to talk to Naya? And I said, you're kidding me. 3 freshmen, one from Houston, one from San Antonio, one from the islands, from Hawaii. And there they are spending the last 3 or 4 days of their first college Christmas together in San Antonio, Texas. That was what I felt. You know, I looked at that and I felt like I was seeing something that was very valuable. And here's another intrigue you want to know that we have 3 teams. We have a varsity reserve, and we have a JV team. What team does Naya play for?
varsity,
What team do you play for?
varsity reserve,
What team does Steph play for?
JV.
JV. Not only were they from 3 different places, but 3 different teams, and they were here. Our team had a special focus this year in terms of their team camaraderie, culture, et cetera, to blend the difference between those 3 teams. I think we did a pretty good job. I think some good things happened. Okay, so about, what, a month ago now, I had 3 tournaments on President's Day weekend that I wanted to cover, big tournaments. And I was caregiver for a knee surgery victim. And so I asked 6 of our players to go to cover tournaments and recruit. These 2 went together. Where'd you go?
St. Louis.
Went to St. Louis. All right. And Friday night, I guess.
Yes.
Yeah, Saturday, Sunday. Friday night, I get a phone call at about 10:15 from Morgan. Tell me about the phone call.
So I called Stew pretty late at night and I was terrified, and I was like, oh no, I don't know what to do. But our motel, the man working at the motel said that we were not allowed to stay there because we were under 21. So we were stranded 5 hours away from campus alone in a car that wasn't ours, in a motel that we didn't know what to do. And Stew picked up right away.
Okay, so she calls me at 10:15, right choice. I had made the reservation, paid for the reservation, assumed everything would be fine, but at this particular hotel, they weren't going for it. So I said, Morgan, let me talk to the gentleman at the desk. And she says, I don't think so, Stu. You said he's screaming at me, right? I said, okay. All right. I said, well, hang on. I'll get back to you in a moment. So I called the Warlands. I called Joe and Pam Warland. Pam still works for the university. Joe should. But at any rate, they live just literally 15 minutes from this hotel. So I called Joe. I said, Joe, I've got these 2 kids there. Maybe you could run over and talk them into the hotel. And the immediate thing he said was, Stu, I think the simpler thing would be if we just give them directions to our house. And they come here and we'll take care of them. So we got a 3-way, right? Mm-hmm. You met Joe on the phone. He gave you his address. You plugged it in, and you went there. And how were you welcomed?
Instantly, I felt like they were people that cared a lot about us and cared about how we were doing. And the first thing they did was offer us food and water and showed us where we could stay and told us to just make ourselves at home and feel comfortable.
Okay. I feel like I'm seeing something. I'm feeling like, once again, that was one of those kind of moments. And so the next day was the 14th. It was Valentine's Day. My wife said to me, shouldn't we do something for the Warlands? I said, don't worry, I'll call the kids. So I called Morgan, and I said, Morgan, it's Valentine's Day. I'm thinking we should do something for Pam and Joe. She says, no, we're on it. We're already going to get something. And I said, well, don't worry about it. I'll pay for it. Just stop and pick something. What'd you get?
We picked up some flowers.
Flowers. So did Pam like it?
Yes, she did. She loved it.
Yeah. All right. It's all good. So they stayed there those 2 nights, under the careful care of 2 of our own, and I think created a moment within which their attitude surely about the strength of the camaraderie and culture that comes with our institution and our faith tradition, et cetera, is at least desirable at a high level. Now, they've already told me that they wouldn't exactly like to go back to St. Louis again, but that didn't totally discourage them with respect to what all was going on. A series of little miracles. All right, Reese, you're on. So, Reese, who are you?
Hi, my name is Reese Toner. I'm from Martinsville, Illinois, and I am a junior.
What's your major?
Allied Health and Criminal Justice.
Okay, what year in school are you?
Junior.
You academic All-American?
Yes.
Oh, that's good to know. So you were planning to come to school in Iowa, right?
Planning to come to school in
Yeah,
Iowa?
you were planning.
Yes.
What school?
Iowa Wesleyan.
What happened to that school?
It closed.
It closed. All of you know that. All right. And when it closed, basically that school appealed to institutions all over the state to do whatever they could to accommodate those students. She was going to be a freshman and we made contact. She came and visited, and ultimately arrived at Graceland. All right. So it's not Iowa Wesleyan, but it's a pretty good place.
Yes.
All right. So Reese is a nice player, but she's had some physical issues. What's the physical issue?
I tore my labrum in my shoulder. I had a slap tear. I just had surgery in November.
Okay. So here's the part that really encouraged me. So we started spring. She really can't train or condition. And we made some decisions as a group that we wanted to change the accountability within our program for spring engagement. And there were some players who volunteered to spearhead that, 2 of them right here. And she can't even train, but she volunteered to stay engaged with the program, exercise some leadership with the program. So she hasn't been able to practice, and she hasn't been able to lift or condition. Have you missed any practices?
No.
Have you missed any conditioning?
No.
No. And in my mind, I feel like I'm seeing something that, once again, makes me feel special about what's going on in her life and in the life of our team. A little miracle, if you will. So we're conditioning one day, and here's Reese, who can't condition, can't join, feels out of it, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then all of a sudden she did this. Do that again. All right, so now did you notice how many hands she used? She used the one hand that was still good. And I don't know, why'd you do that?
Because I like doing gymnastics.
Okay.
And I can't sit still.
All right, she liked doing gymnastics, but here's what the coach thought. She made a statement to the rest of her team, who she had been serving, logically enough, that I want to be integrated at the highest level possible, even though I'm not physically able to do everything that everybody's doing today. I can do this, and I feel more like I'm a part. There was a second step for me, and that is when you're a coach, there's a part of you when you see execution at a high level that you feel that's almost a sacred moment because you struggle so hard to get to a given level. And here she was doing this on one hand, and I just thought, wow, I think that's just what the Lord would have intended, would have liked to see. Thank you so much, Reese. Thanks. Well, I'll remember these stories and the vision and the insight and the little miracles that they brought in my life for a long, long time. I hope you are or will be filled with a spirit confirming the many times your life has been blessed because of moments where you saw. And that you will be ever more alert to the continued miracles that abound all around us every day.